When World War II began in September 1939, the battlefield was not limited to land or air. Far from the headlines, a silent and deadly war erupted across the vast waters of the Atlantic Ocean. This struggle would become known as the Battle of the Atlantic, the longest continuous military campaign of the entire war. At the center of this battle was a weapon that operated unseen, unheard, and often unstoppable as the German U-boat. U-boat, short for undersea boat, meaning undersea boat, was Germany's most effective naval weapon. Unlike surface warships, U-boats could disappear beneath the waves, strike without warning, and vanish again into the depths. For the Allies, especially Britain, this posed an existential threat. Britain was an island nation. It depended almost entirely on overseas supply routes for food, fuel, weapons, and raw materials. If those supply lines were severed, Britain could be forced into surrender without a single soldier stepping onto its shores. Adolf Hitler and the German High Command understood this reality very well. Germany knew it could not match the British Royal Navy ship for ship. Instead, it chose a strategy of economic warfare. The goal was simple: sink merchant ships faster than the Allies could replace them. The responsibility for this mission fell to Admiral Karl D. Pilkronitz, commander of the German submarine fleet. D. Pilkronitz believed submarines were the future of naval warfare. He envisioned small, coordinated groups of U-boats attacking convoys like wolves hunting prey. This tactic became known as the Wolf Pack. A single U-boat would locate a convoy and radio its position. Other submarines would converge silently. Then, under the cover of darkness, they would strike simultaneously from multiple directions. In the early years of the war, this strategy was devastatingly effective. At the start of World War II, the Allies were dangerously unprepared for submarine warfare. Many escort ships lacked modern detection equipment. Air patrols were limited in range. Vast areas of the Atlantic remained completely unprotected. Merchant ships often sailed alone, making them easy targets. U-boats exploited these weaknesses mercilessly. They attacked at night, often on the surface, where they were faster and more maneuverable. Torpedoes slammed into unarmed cargo ships, tearing them apart in seconds. Thousands of sailors died in freezing Atlantic waters, often with no warning and little chance of rescue. By 1941, the situation had become critical. German torpedoes were highly advanced for their time. Fired from underwater tubes, they could travel long distances and explode beneath a ship's hull, where damage was most severe. Some torpedoes were designed to detonate using magnetic triggers, exploding under the keel and breaking ships in half. Although early versions had reliability issues, constant improvements made them increasingly deadly. For merchant crews, the danger was ever present. A calm sea, a dark night, or even a routine voyage could suddenly turn into a disaster. The Atlantic had become a killing ground. In 1942, after the United States entered the war, the U-boat campaign reached a new peak. Along the American East Coast, cities kept their lights on at night, silhouetting ships against the horizon. German submarines operated almost freely. This period became known among U-boat crews as the Second Happy Time. Tankers burned offshore. Wreckage washed onto beaches. Entire convoys vanished beneath the waves. For a brief moment, it appeared that Germany might actually succeed in choking the Allied supply system. Despite their success, life aboard a U-boat was harsh and dangerous. Crews lived in cramped, steel tubes with little fresh air. Food spoiled quickly. There were no showers. Diesel fumes and sweat filled the air. Every patrol carried the constant risk of death. Depth charges could crush their hull. Mechanical failures could trap a submarine underwater forever. A single mistake could doom the entire crew. Yet morale remained high in the early years, fueled by success and a belief in the importance of their mission. By late 1942, the Allies began to adapt. Losses forced innovation. New technologies were rushed into service. Radar, sonar, long-range aircraft, and better escort coordination slowly began to close the gaps U-boats depended on. The hunters were about to face something new. What had once been an open ocean was becoming a monitored battlefield, and the dominance of the U-boat was about to be challenged. The rise of the U-boat marked one of the most dangerous phases of World War II. For years, German submarines controlled the depths of the Atlantic, pushing the Allies to the brink of collapse. But warfare never stands still. As the U-boats perfected their hunt, The Allies prepared a response A1 built on technology, coordination, and relentless pursuit. By 1942, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a critical stage. German U-boats were sinking Allied ships at an alarming rate, but something had begun to change. The Allies were no longer reacting blindly. They were learning, adapting, and most importantly, innovating. The future of the war would be decided not by a single weapon, but by a system of detection, coordination, and destruction designed specifically to hunt submarines. The first challenge was simple but deadly: finding a submarine. U-boats relied on stealth. Beneath the surface, they were invisible to the human eye. To counter this, the Allies expanded the use of sonar, originally known as ASDIC. Sonar allowed escort ships to emit sound waves into the water and listen for echoes bouncing back from submerged objects. For the first time, submarines could be tracked underwater. At the same time, radar technology revolutionized surface detection. Radar-equipped ships and aircraft could detect U-boats traveling on the surface, even at night or through fog. This ended the U-boat's ability to attack freely under darkness. Stealth was no longer guaranteed. Once a U-boat was detected, it had to be destroyed. The most common Allied weapon was the depth charge, a large explosive device dropped into the water and set to detonate at a specific depth. When it exploded, the shockwave traveled through the water, capable of crushing submarine hulls, disabling engines, or rupturing internal systems. Depth charges did not need a direct hit. Near misses were often enough to force a U-boat to surface or abandon its patrol. However, depth charges had limitations. Escort ships had to pass directly over the target, briefly losing sonar contact. Skilled U-boat captains learned to evade these attacks, turning sharply or diving deeper at the last moment. The Allies needed something better. The breakthrough came with a weapon called Hedgehog. Unlike depth charges, Hedgehog was mounted on the front of escort ships and fired forward, launching dozens of small explosive projectiles in a circular pattern. These projectiles only exploded if they made direct contact with the submarine. This changed everything. Escort ships could now maintain sonar contact during the attack. If there was no explosion, crews immediately knew the attack had failed and could strike again without delay. Hedgehog dramatically increased the destruction rate of U-boats. Silent, sudden, and precise, it became one of the most feared anti-submarine weapons of the war. Air power became the Allies' greatest advantage. Long-range patrol aircraft expanded coverage across the Atlantic, eliminating areas where U-boats once operated safely. Aircraft such as the B-24 Liberator and Catalina flying boats patrolled day and night, scanning for submarines on the surface. U-boats had to surface regularly to recharge batteries and refresh air. This made them vulnerable. Aircraft attacks were swift and deadly. Bombs, depth charges, and machine gun fire forced submarines to dive in panic, often before they were fully prepared. To support air operations, the Allies introduced escort carriers, small aircraft carriers that traveled with convoys or operated independently. These carriers formed the core of hunter-killer groups. Instead of waiting for U-boats to attack, these groups actively searched for them. Once a submarine was detected, it could be pursued for hours or even days. Aircraft and ships worked together, attacking repeatedly until the U-boat was destroyed or forced to surface. For U-boat crews, escape became nearly impossible. The FIDO torpedo, sound as a weapon. One of the most secret and deadly Allied weapons was the FIDO acoustic torpedo. Dropped from aircraft, FIDO homed in on the sound of a submarine's propellers. Even deep-diving U-boats could not hide from it if they were moving. This weapon was used sparingly to maintain secrecy, but its impact was devastating. Submarines that once believed themselves safe at depth were suddenly vulnerable. Silence, once a U-boat's greatest protection, became a liability. German countermeasures fail. Germany responded with radar detectors, sonar decoys, and improved submarine designs. The most advanced was the Type 21 U-boat, capable of longer submerged operations and higher underwater speed. But innovation came too late. Allied bombing crippled German shipyards. Fuel shortages limited training and patrols. Experienced crews were lost faster than they could be replaced. By 1943, U-boat losses were catastrophic. A war of attrition ends. Month by month, the statistics told a grim story. More submarines were being destroyed than launched. Crews were exhausted. Morale collapsed. The Atlantic, once dominated by German submarines, had become their grave. Closing narration. Part 2 End. The defeat of the U-boat was not achieved by chance. It was the result of relentless innovation, coordination, and technological superiority. Depth charges weakened them. Hedgehog hunted them. Aircraft exposed them. Acoustic torpedoes finished them. The ocean no longer belonged to the. By the spring of 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic reached its decisive phase. What had once been a terrifying advantage for Germany was rapidly turning into a disaster. U-boats were no longer the unseen masters of the ocean. They were targets. Every patrol now carried the expectation of death. The deadliest year for U-boats, 1943, became the most catastrophic year in the history of German submarine warfare. Allied escort ships, aircraft, and hunter-killer groups were operating with unprecedented coordination. Sonar contacts were followed relentlessly. Radar eliminated surprise. Aircraft closed escape routes. U-boats were being detected, tracked, and destroyed at a pace Germany could not sustain. Entire patrols failed to return. In some months, more than one U-boat per day was lost. The Atlantic, once open and forgiving, had become a tightly controlled battlefield. Real encounters, real destruction. Many U-boats were destroyed after hours of pursuit. Some were forced to remain submerged so long that air became toxic and batteries failed. When they surfaced, Allied ships and aircraft were already waiting. Others were shattered by Hedgehog attacks that struck without warning. Explosions tore through pressure hulls, killing crews instantly. Some submarines imploded as they exceeded safe diving depth while attempting escape. Very few survivors ever emerged. The psychological collapse. The physical destruction of U-boats was only part of the story. The psychological toll on crews was devastating. Earlier in the war, submarine service had been considered elite. Now, it was widely regarded as a death sentence. New recruits lacked experience. Veteran commanders were gone. Patrols grew shorter, but danger increased. Crews knew that silence no longer guaranteed safety, and depth no longer meant protection. Fear followed them beneath the waves. Admiral D.A. Tilde Pilkronitz admits defeat. Even Admiral Karl D.A. Tilde Pilkronitz, the architect of the U-boat campaign, could no longer deny reality. In mid-1943, he ordered a large-scale withdrawal of submarines from the North Atlantic. The cost was simply too high. The Allies had achieved technological dominance, and Germany could not match it. This marked the strategic defeat of the U-boat arm. Though submarines continued to operate for the remainder of the war, they never again posed a serious threat to Allied supply lines. Too late. The Type 21, Germany's final hope, lay in a revolutionary submarine as the Type 21. This U-boat was far ahead of its time. It could remain submerged for extended periods, travel faster underwater than on the surface, and recharge batteries quickly. On paper, it could have changed naval warfare forever. But history is unforgiving. By the time Type 21 submarines were ready, Germany was collapsing. Allied bombing had devastated factories. Fuel was scarce. Crews were untrained. Very few Type 21 boats ever became operational, and none changed the outcome of the war. Technology, introduced too late, is useless. The human cost. The U-boat war was one of the deadliest assignments of World War II. Out of approximately 40,000 German submariners, more than 30,000 were killed. This represents one of the highest casualty rates of any military force in the war. Entire crews vanished without a trace. No graves, no survivors, only silence beneath the sea. For the Allies, the victory was costly, but essential. Without control of the Atlantic, the invasion of Normandy, the liberation of Europe, and the final defeat of Nazi Germany would have been impossible. Why the Atlantic victory mattered. The defeat of the U-boats ensured a constant flow of troops, fuel, food, and weapons from North America to Europe. Factories could supply armies, soldiers could cross oceans, airfields could be built, invasion forces could gather. The Atlantic became a bridge, not a barrier. This victory did not come from a single battle, but from years of innovation, sacrifice, and persistence. The weapon was not one machine. The question often asked is simple: what weapon destroyed the U-boats? The answer is complex. There was no single weapon. It was sonar that found them. It was radar that exposed them. It was aircraft that trapped them. It was Hedgehog and depth charges that shattered them. It was acoustic torpedoes that hunted them in silence. Together, these formed the most effective anti-submarine system in history. Closing narration. Final end. The German U-boat began the war as a weapon of terror, capable of changing history from beneath the waves. But war rewards adaptation, not ambition. As Allied technology advanced and coordination improved, the U-boat lost its greatest advantage: invisibility. By the end of World War II, the Atlantic was no longer a hunting ground for submarines. It was there,